VisualPolitik community, China has spoiled us badly. For years, it has been breaking all kinds of economic, industrial, and also military records. China seemed to be opening up to the world, and the world wanted to embrace China. In recent years, however, that narrative has been twisted. The economy has cooled. International companies are looking for new markets. In January, the country's tech giants stopped shining like a Christmas tree on Wall Street. In general, relations between China and the West have gone downhill. To make matters worse, in Xi Jinping's Beijing, a new political agenda with a very nationalistic slant has replaced the economic agenda as the government's first objective. In recent years, China has reversed the opening up that it had been building on for decades, step by step. We're not exaggerating. Do you want some examples? Well, look, the Communist Party has once again entered private enterprises like someone who sneaks into the kitchen at midnight, silently, but leaving traces everywhere. In this case, they have done it by placing political commissars on the boards of directors of many companies. Then, the government has also cracked down on the big tech companies, which it has punished unceremoniously, and Hong Kong lost its historic political freedom in 2020, basically for annoying Xi Jinping. In fact, the campaign to regain total control launched by the Chinese leader has now even reached the armed forces themselves.
China's military purge highlights persistence of corruption. China closed 2023 with a military purge. This time, it was the military's turn, with 9 high-ranking generals.
So it seems Xi Jinping has gone straight for the jugular of the Chinese military high command. But why is this happening? Are we facing a real-life animal farm? Who exactly are the top generals who have been dismissed? And the most important question of all, what on earth can these changes mean? Today we're going to answer all these questions, but first, what kind of precautions do you take when you're surfing the web? It's super important to protect yourself from online threats, especially if you tend to connect to public Wi-Fi networks. This is where NordVPN really comes into play. With NordVPN, forget about having to choose between security and speed. You've got access to over 6,000 ultra-fast servers that let you explore the internet without limits, tap into a ton of new content, and keep enjoying your favorites while traveling. Plus, NordVPN's threat protection tool shields you from all kinds of digital dangers, from malware and trackers to unsafe sites and apps. And there's more. For instance, if you connect through a server in Albania, you see that most ads just vanish, making your browsing cleaner and more enjoyable. NordVPN works with loads of devices, including Android, Windows, Mac, and Linux. With just one account, you can hook up to 10 different devices. Don't wait any longer. Visit nordvpn.com/VisualPolitikEN to get 4 extra months with your 2-year plan. And if you change your mind, you have 30 days to try it out with no strings attached. Whenever we talk about the Vietnam War, we all think of the huge military disaster the United States had to deal with during its fight against the Viet Cong. Thousands of lives and tens of billions of dollars spent in a struggle that left behind no achievements for the Americans, despite being up against an enemy that appeared to be far inferior on paper. A description that also perfectly summarizes the Sino-Vietnamese War of 1979. Much less is known about this one, but in December 1978, practically on the heels of the war with the Americans, Vietnam invaded Cambodia to overthrow the pro-Chinese regime of Pol Pot and install one more in line with the interests of Hanoi. Deng Xiaoping's China responded by launching a large-scale military operation against northern Vietnam. So what happened? Well, despite making some progress at one point, Vietnamese resistance surprised the Chinese forces, and the campaign became costly for both sides. In the end, China withdrew its troops in March 1979 without having succeeded in restoring a pro-Chinese government to power in Cambodia. The Chinese operation was a military disaster that caused more than 20,000 casualties in just 4 weeks in what was known as the Chinese People's Liberation Army. A disaster. But what on earth does this war have to do with Xi Jinping's purges? Well, you see, that war was a humiliation for Beijing. The Chinese government had overestimated its military capability without taking into account corruption, lack of training and combat experience, equipment failures, and so on and so forth. This is very similar to what has happened to Vladimir Putin's Russia in Ukraine. The failed Russian Express invasion of Ukraine has reminded Beijing of what can happen when you don't take into account that dictatorships have 3 characteristics that affect all power structures: lack of transparency, corruption, and that no one tells the truth, especially if the truth is uncomfortable. And of course, China is no exception.
Corruption is a cancer to the vitality and ability of the party, and fighting corruption is the most thorough kind of self-reform there is.
And it is right here that we come to an absolutely key point. The fact that Xi Jinping wants to control all the political and military structures of China is something that I think we all have quite clear, even if it is only because it gets repeated in the media every so often. However, there is also something else, something that is often overlooked. What do I mean by that? Well, you see, Xi Jinping is afraid that the same thing will happen with China as with Russia. That is, that massive and rampant corruption will end up ruining his enormous political ambitions. In fact, check this out. This man you see on screen, Alistair Ian Johnston, who is a Harvard scholar, compiled the number of times official articles used concepts critical of the military's performance between 2006 and 2018. As you can see, references to the weaknesses of the armed forces have skyrocketed since Xi Jinping came to power in 2013. And evidently, this is entirely intentional. In China, there is no freedom of the press or freedom of speech. If official articles criticize the military, it must be because the leader approves it. Well, in order to change this dynamic, the Chinese leader is convinced that a strong hand, ideology, and nationalism are ingredients that could act as an antidote to corruption.
Chinese President Xi Jinping demands absolute loyalty from PLA. Chinese crackdown aims to break vicious circle of military corruption.
And that is why, as soon as he came to power, he got down to work. But how exactly did he do it? And what results is he achieving? Is the Chinese military as strong as it's said to be? Well, let's take a look.
Xi-style chain of command.
In China, the line separating the Communist Party from the state is very thin, and in many situations, completely non-existent. And the armed forces themselves do not escape this reality. A good example is the Central Military Commission. And what is this commission? Well, it's no small thing. We're talking about the body in charge of drawing up military plans, approving the development and purchase of weapons, organizing missions, and approving promotions and decorations, among many other issues. In other words, it is an absolutely key element in the management of the armed forces. Well, this commission in China is also known as the institution with two names. This is because this body is part of both the Communist Party and the state itself. It's a strange duality that makes it the party and not the military hierarchy that controls the management of the armed forces. Now, I'm sure many of you think that this is basically to be expected, right? That in a communist dictatorship, at least by name, it is the Communist Party that controls the military. Well, yes, but not at the same time. You see, since Deng Xiaoping, the various Chinese governments have sought to reduce the influence of the party in this commission in order to improve the professionalization of the armed forces. The idea was that it should be the officers of the military and not a few party bureaucrats who were in charge of directing the military. Well, this was the case until the arrival of Xi Jinping, who soon afterwards began to reverse all the changes to give more power back to the party again. In fact, he did more. In 2015, he divided this body into 15 different departments that would answer directly to the same person, to the great leader. But we're not done yet. Xi Jinping also made another big change, dissolving the military regions. The armed forces are currently divided into 5 theaters of operations: East, South, West, North, and Central. At the head of each of them is a high commander who controls all the branches of the armed forces in that region: land, sea, and air. We are talking about a sort of viceroy who answers directly to Xi Jinping. Not surprisingly, they are men who have his complete confidence. In this way, the circle has been tightened and control over the armed forces has soared. This has caused the regional and local bosses to lose all their power. Think about it. If in the past, these little local bosses answered to a terribly bureaucratic committee, which logically gave them a lot of leeway, now they have a boss who reports directly to the great leader, overseeing their movements.
The reform has drastically changed the basis for corruption in the army that have been deeply rooted and intertwined. It is driven by the internal need for building a modern army to be more capable of winning a war, as well as the significance to root out corruption more effectively.
Xi Jinping himself denied this change as a breakthrough, a historic turning point. However, many years have passed since then, and the question is, what was the result?
Facing Xi Jinping deja vu?
Xi Jinping's reforms were supposed to stamp out the great ills of the Chinese military. Even so, that didn't exactly happen. And the thing is, one of the biggest problems that experts say the Chinese armed forces have is that they don't have combat experience. But apart from that, the fight against corruption, the full-speed modernization of military equipment, and the new organization were supposed to have put an end to the remaining ills. The problem is that, a decade on, things don't seem to be going as well as they should be. Mind you, it's not just us saying so. Everything indicates that behind the purges that have been been carried out lately in the military, there is not only Xi Jinping's attempt to remove key people throughout the entire political, economic, and military structure of China and replace them with people from his inner circle, but also, and this is perhaps the most important thing, to try to stop another wave of failures.
U.S. intelligence shows flawed China missiles led Xi to purge army. Xi Jinping's ambition to unify Taiwan motivates military purges.
You see, the crown jewel of Chinese military power is the Rocket Force. This is a division that operates as an independent branch and controls China's arsenal of land-based ballistic, hypersonic, and cruise missiles. It is a critical arm for ensuring deterrence, but it would also be the absolute crucial force for an eventual military takeover of Taiwan. This force would be tasked with completely annihilating the island's defenses as the infantry and navy advance to seize and encircle the island. But naturally, if the missiles fail, then the invasion would probably fail. Keep in mind that we are talking about taking a well-protected island with a topography that makes landings very difficult. Well, here's the problem. In 2023, the performance of the Rocket Force was terribly disappointing. We're talking about reports of failed tests, delays in the construction of launch centers, negligence of all kinds, and a lot of corruption surrounding the purchase and management of the equipment of this force. Precisely because of this, in August 2023, Xi immediately dismissed Li Yuchao, the commander, and Zhu Zhongbo, the political commissar of the Rocket Force. They are both currently under investigation for corruption. Then, in October 2023, the Chinese government announced the dismissal of its defense minister, General Li Shangfu. And in December of the same year, the Chinese parliament resolved the dismissal of 9 generals linked to the missile force and equipment development. In addition, it is very likely that there will be more changes inside. Obviously, Xi Jinping is facing an uncomfortable situation. After 10 years of reforms and political intervention, the armed forces do not seem to be in as good shape as promised, and everything indicates that corruption is still rampant. The good news is that all these problems could delay any attempt by Beijing to take Taiwan by force, long enough for the island and Western allies to prepare a defense that would ultimately make such a possibility unfeasible. You can imagine how furious Xi Jinping must be. Things are not going well for him, neither economically nor, it seems, militarily. But having reached this point, the question is now over to you. Do you think the Chinese armed forces are as powerful as they are said to be? How would you stamp out corruption? Tell us what you think in the comments, and if you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you very much for watching. All the best. See you next time.